Hi, and welcome to the 75th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the inventor of TiddlyWiki, and today I'm joined by, from left to right on my screen, Jed. Hi, Jed. Would you like to say hello, say where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Hi, I'm Jed. I'm from the southeastern or southwestern United States, and I mainly use TiddlyWiki to organize things for my dissertation research. I'm getting a PhD in electrical engineering, so I make stuff.
Yes, and indeed, it has contributed a lot to documentation and to the groups recently. And one of the things I wanted to talk about actually was the YouTube stuff that you've been doing, Jed. Mario, hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. My name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg, contributed to TiddlyWiki Classic and TiddlyWiki 5 with the translations, and been a little bit lazy lately, so yeah, that's it.
Well, it's good to have you both here. Thank you very much for making the time for today. We were just discussing before we came on air that it's just been Christmas, and so a period of, for me, of not using the laptop a great deal and not doing much TiddlyWiki stuff, which is quite nice to have a break as well. It's something that I spend a lot of time doing at normal times. But there's, as usual, I think there's plenty to discuss. One of the things I wanted to kick off with actually was the work that Jed's been doing with YouTube macros. So I think we discussed this a little last week as well when Rich Schumacher was here. So it was Rich who suggested the idea of a slightly trying to make the Hangout videos more useful. So so far, what we've done is Mario very kindly has each week laboriously annotated the discussions with a time code, which he puts on TiddlySpace, and then I paste those descriptions into YouTube, which is what makes the links work to directly jump to a chunk of the Hangout. And so Rich's idea was to basically do all of that inside TiddlyWiki 5 so that one would get a searchable, indexable, taggable record of discussions. And I think where we got to last week was Rich showed the work that he'd been doing. And one of the very striking things about it was that he was doing something that we often talk about with text, which is the idea of taking a long passage of text, cutting it up into smaller chunks that you make individual tiddlers so that you can add structure and so on. And essentially that was what Rich was doing with the videos, cutting them up into the smallest semantic unit chunks, making tiddlers to correspond to them, and jumping, being able to view those positions.
There's an echo somewhere.
Yes, there is. I wonder if it's... do you want to... Let me try experimentally muting Mario. That didn't do any good. I don't know how to unmute you, Mario, sorry. Ah, Jed, it is you. I fear. Because it went as soon as you muted yourself. But Jed, I was going to ask, would you be in a position to demo the work that you've been doing on this? My understanding is that you were, party to the discussions on the group, and then got rather seduced by writing, by getting into this YouTube stuff. And I'd be very interested to see how far you've got.
Yes. Okay. Right. Looks like the echo's stopped.
It may be hang on, if I mute myself, if you see what I mean, it might be that it's feedback, so that might... Oh, here's Nathan. Hi, Nathan. Feedback problems. How are you, Nathan?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. You've joined us actually just as we were getting started. Would you like to introduce yourself, say where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki in time-honored fashion?
Sure. I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States, and been working with TiddlyWiki for probably a little over a year now, and developing a little bit on core and helping to plan direction and whatnot.
Indeed, indeed. And Nathan's famous for his pull requests, which there's been a number of in the last year. We were just talking about YouTube macros and other such bits and pieces with reference to Rich's work on trying to annotate the Hangouts to make them more useful. And Jed was kindly going to demo some of the work that he's been doing on this.
Jed, can you screen share?
Yeah, give me just a second. Let's see. Here and this one. Working? Okay. So yes, this is actually Rich Shoemaker, and I believe it was Astrid. I do not know what her last name was. They had Rich, like Jeremy had just said, had started to annotate the videos, and Astrid had made some very nice JavaScript macros that you could use for doing this. And I wanted to include something like that in my the no learning required things that I've been making, but I don't know enough about JavaScript to actually maintain something done in JavaScript. So I decided to see if I could do it just using the core TiddlyWiki. Mostly it works. The only problem is, let's see if there anything show up here. Yes, all of the timestamps themselves are stored as tiddlers, and it gives you this ugly YouTube identification string, and then the timestamp, and there's some tags and things like that I'll get to in a second. So that's the problem that I'm having. Me and Jeremy were talking about the limitations of data tiddlers, which we'll get to, and that's all related to that. But yeah, for what I have now, it's just the YouTube video embedded. You can give it a start and an end time. Unfortunately, since I'm not using JavaScript, those have to be given in seconds instead of any of the more convenient ones. But you can just select a video. There's the Hangout 73, or you can add videos there with the YouTube ID and video name, and then you can play the video and give it the timestamp. Unfortunately, once again, since I'm not using JavaScript here, you do have to give it in hours, minutes, and seconds, and it has to be the 2 digits for each one, like the 0, 1 instead of just 1. And then you can give it some description and add a tag to it and add a timestamp. And that is pretty much where it is now. With the tags and everything, each one of these tiddlers that it makes, it gets it the timestamp as the or gets a tag of the YouTube ID and whatever tags you give it. So I'm hoping to make them searchable across, all of the different tags you put on and whatever other relevant things it would be to search by. And that's where it is at the moment. It is all done using macros in wiki text. And yeah, there was some discussion about the string concatenation for making URLs, which I had apparently stumbled on a solution for and didn't realize that it was something people had been having trouble with.
Yes.
But yeah, just a set widget and a macro call with the variable syntax like that, and you can add them together however you want. I have not come up with any trouble with that yet.
So where are the data tiddlers that we need to that we'd like to be able to search?
Oh yes, those ones are. Figure out where I put that. Yes, here. So what I would like to do right now, what it does is this select widget. It takes the index name of from this data tiddler and then stores the value here in a field in the video annotations tiddler here, and then that is used to build all the other things. That is one place where the string concatenation was not working for me because for some reason using the text references to fields worked just fine, but using for the string concatenation things, but using a text reference to a data tiller wasn't. I think that was the thing. I have no idea what the difference would be, but there is something in there that I don't remember exactly was giving me trouble.
Okay.
So
Okay.
because of that, I have this string, and it's going to be unique, and I want to be able to pull that out, or the index name out of it. Otherwise, you get these ugly tiddler names which mean nothing when you look at them.
Yeah.
And unless you want me to try to get into how this works, which I think would take
I mean,
quite a bit of
stepping
discussing.
back a tiny bit, Jed, the thing that again interests me a lot here is the apparent ease with which you've been able to render, I think, quite a what's the word? Intuitive interface. So the thing that you marked about the units having to put the start and end times in seconds and the strict 2-character requirements on the timestamps, those are obvious wrinkles. But the basic, you've kind of got a database front end here, and I think some of your other work is also a bit like that. That it's the kind of thing that 20 years ago people were doing. Microsoft Access, was an easy way to access these types of facilities, being able to, what they would have said, viewing a record, viewing a list of records, being able to bring up a form for adding a new record, and yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating to me that you describe yourself as not. You're at pains to note that you're not a JavaScript developer, but I mean you clearly have a high degree of technical proficiency, and it's rather wonderful to me that you've been able to pull this kind of thing together. It's not so, this is very un-wiki-like, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm very pleased to see it. I also think that we need a much more capable built-in, well, by built-in I mean official, I don't mean necessarily YouTube widget, because the really nice thing to be able to do would be that as you pressed play, that we'd get the timestamp rolling, moving, and that you'd be able to press a button saying now and another button, start, another button for end, and it would use JavaScript to read the current position of the video and allow you to whack it into a tiddler or into a field. And I don't think that would be that hard to do. Just in terms of the complexity of the core plugins that we've already got.
Jeremy, does Google provide some API to get the video information?
It does, yeah. But quite a nice one, and pretty stable. I mean, I wouldn't feel too bad about building in that dependency into a core plugin. But very cool. Now, we've got some questions in the Q&A panel from Nicholas Spies. Nicholas has been, as shame is, hopefully you're watching, Nicholas, in which case, hi, good to meet you. Do feel free to join the other URL that I published so that you can join the Hangout and, and participate too. But in the meantime, I'll pick off your questions, and I don't know if this is the order that they were. Don't know which is the order they were written in and which is the order. Anyway, but I'm going to take them from the top. Oh, and I think this must be the wrong way around because it's okay. That's frustrating because having selected it, it will now disappear if I go and select. And I'm going to answer your questions without selecting them, so that means that the indicator that you may be seeing of what question I'm on is wrong. So first thing was about the double scroll bar issue. So Nicholas had emailed me, I think, a week or so ago, pointing out the clumsiness of the way that on browsers that have visible scroll bars, TiddlyWiki gives you two scroll bars off to the right, and they don't control the things that you'd expect them to control. Let me, what I normally would do is now so that we can see this. So what I'm actually doing is kicking off a Windows emulator, because that's the place where I've got a browser that I know displays scroll bars. So let me screen share, and then you'll be able to see the problem that Nicholas is talking about. Right, so hello Windows, aren't I fashionable? And I've got TiddlyWiki 5 loaded up in an Internet Explorer window. So you can see at the moment there's a single scroll bar over to the right here, and that scroll bar is scrolling the main story river. If I now switch to a tab with more in it, you can see that we've now got a second scroll bar. The right-hand scroll bar still scrolls the main page, and this scroll bar scrolls the sidebar. And it's really obvious, I think, that in situations when we're on a browser that shows scroll bars, what would be preferable is if this scroll bar was over here to the right of the story river. So the problem here, it's a problem that I recognise that these scroll bars. Oh, Windows is shut down. That those scroll bars are clumsy and inconvenient. I don't tend to notice it so much myself, because I tend to be working on the Mac, where scroll bars are invisible until you use them. So now, as I'm scrolling the sidebar scroll bar has appeared, and now I can pick up the, it's very difficult, but I can pick up the thumb of the scroll bar and scroll, or I can scroll the main story column and again pick up that scroll bar. So there's not so much confusion, particularly if you're scrolling with a trackpad or a mouse, and I guess on the Mac at least everybody does. So with that introduction, just going back to Nicholas's question. Oh, good, and you can see it now. I feel the double scroll bar issue could be answered by simply having two scroll bars, each to the right of the viewport it controls. Viewports should be identified by hairlines around them. Tools should not scroll and be located at the screen bottom. So I think Nicholas had sent me a mock-up of this before, which was the idea of a position fixed toolbar across the bottom of the screen with the page controls. And yes, it's an alternative layout that I think is very attractive and useful. It's much more app-like layout than the layout that we have at the moment. I don't propose to change the default layout, because that quite intentionally is designed to be slightly more like a web page than like an application, if you see what I mean. But it's certainly something I would like to support with an official theme. So the issue, the reason why we've got the scroll bars all over to the right is the way that the sidebars are laid out. So to me, fixing this is related to another problem that's been discussed recently, which is the frustrations that when we add a top bar, and so I can do this by adding a tiddler tags, I think it's top left bar, and give it some text, nice big text. So now, bad example, let's put an image in there. So you can see I've now got a toolbar at the top of the screen that contains the image of Motiv and Jack. The problem is that when I scroll, the scroll mechanism doesn't know about that toolbar. So for instance, I'll scroll to getting started, and what I'd actually want is it to scroll like that. Obviously the toolbar should have a solid background. So this isn't the same problem, but this is a significant limitation that we have with the way that TiddlyWiki 5 lays out the screen. What I would like to do to fix it is to introduce a new, probably a story view rather than a widget that basically uses JavaScript to lay out the window by positioning each of the sidebars on the whichever side of the window they're supposed to be stuck to, and then computing the leftover space and using that for the story river. And that will give us a lot more flexibility. People would, for instance, be able to add, if you've got a wide screen, you'd be able to add multiple sidebar tabs that were visible all the time as separate columns. It's the thing that will allow us to have multi-column displays of tiddlers as well. So that's the situation that the way to fix, as far as I can tell, best way to fix the double scroll bar issue is to fix the way that we lay out our sidebars, and a side effect of that will be that the scroll bar will move to being just wrapped around the story river. Oh, and I really am taking these the wrong order. Nick's next question is actually an introduction, which is great. Nick is saying, I'm Nick Spies from Chester County, southeast Pennsylvania. Although introduced to TiddlyWiki a few years ago, the book I planned to write with it wasn't. I returned to TiddlyWiki about a month or so ago, and it has rapidly become essential. That's great to hear, Nicholas. TiddlyWiki suffers, in my opinion, from not having built into each TiddlyWiki a basic history and back and forward buttons to traverse it. And I believe here, and Nicholas, do feel free to add another question to clarify this. But I think this is, if I remember correctly, because Nicholas is using Tiddly Desktop, and therefore he doesn't get the browser's back and forward buttons, and so therefore he can't navigate history. So if that's correct, that's quite timely. As I showed last week, I've been working on Tiddly Desktop recently, and one of the changes that I'm hoping to introduce won't necessarily be in the first of the new releases, but will be soon, is a toolbar, a configurable toolbar on each TiddlyWiki window, and one of the things that would offer is backwards and forwards.
Jeremy, can you show the mechanism in the existing TiddlyWiki for the browsers?
Yes, sorry, I should do that. So let me just refresh to get rid of that toolbar. So by default, when I click a link, we navigate to the link, but if I click the browser back button, it'll, well, in fact, it's, okay, it'd be much clearer. Let's do something. Okay, so there's my Google Plus events page. And now I'll go to TiddlyWiki in this tab, if you see what I mean. And if I open some tiddlers, when I go back, I will go back to the Google Plus events page. That's by default an option you can set in Control Panel. Sorry, were you going to say something, Mary?
No, it's okay.
Was whether to update browser history when navigating to a tiddler. So this means now, as I navigate between tiddlers, I can press the back button. Ooh. I think I also, I'd forgotten this. I also need to switch it to navigation address bar, which is where, as you navigate to tiddlers, the address bar changes, the location hash changes to reflect two things, the current tiddler and the list of tiddlers in the story view. So with those two settings changed, now back button, I navigate through my history within TiddlyWiki. So it's going from navigating between the tiddlers that I visited and eventually it'll go back to the Google Plus events page. Not quite sure why it's not going back to the Google Plus events page. So we had lots of discussion about that behavior, whether it was better to have it turned on by default. So in my own personal TiddlyWikis, I have both of those enabled, and I find it incredibly useful. I think, Mario, you also don't work with the out-of-the-box settings as well, is that right?
It depends. So sometimes you need the browser history, and sometimes I don't. So I switch it on and off as I need it.
Mm. That makes sense. Okay, so Nick, if I'm understanding you correctly, and you're referring to being able to do that in Tiddly Desktop, then the answer is that's planned, and hopefully in the next few weeks I'll get a chance to do that. And okay, and this is very good actually, because Nicholas had sent me a couple of emails and I had a chance to reply to, and he's picking up a couple of topics from those emails, so that makes me feel less bad about being slow at answering emails. So next question, Jeremy provided a link to his experiments with using a ZUI to TiddlyWiki elements. While interesting, I think it would be more useful to have a ZUI data type available for use inside Tiddlers, using to depict the TiddlyWiki itself as a directed graph. So let me screen share right before I do my annual forgetting to whether I'm screen sharing or not. So the link that I sent to Nick was this, which I've shown on the Hangouts many times. Done back in 2008, so it's TiddlyWiki Classic. It was an attempt to build what's called a zoomable user interface. So these were a class of interface invented by Jeff Raskin, subsequently worked on by a number of people, including Ben Bedison. The idea is that your content exists on an infinite 2D plane, and that you navigate that content by panning and zooming. And in the case of a wiki built in this way, we also can navigate by clicking links. And each link we click opens the target tiddler at the position that's specified in what I call the map. And there's also maps are an abstraction, if you mean. I can switch to a different map which moves the tiddlers around to different positions. So part of what I was trying to explore with this is the idea that given a set of wiki content, multiple people could make maps of that content, that we tap into I think very basic human behavior, that if we see two things sort of positioned like this, we are inclined to see a relationship between those things. We see this thing as being the most important thing, that perhaps the second most important thing. So we can use the spatial relationship and the size of things to convey information about the relationships between the things, but without having to, this is advantage of the fact our brains will try and see patterns. So things like those guys being in a row there, our brains will see them as being related. So I've been interested in this stuff for a while, and TiddlyWiki 5 incorporates, or included in the repo, is a embryonic Cecily plugin. In the case of which is no longer installed by default, so let me just go to the place where it is. I'm using it in this introduction wiki, which I've shown before. This is the basis for the current introduction YouTube video, and one navigates, it's basically a presentation that you navigate by following links, and it introduces the basic principles of TiddlyWiki. The thing that if I need to make some changes. So this presentation uses a special theme called Hide Furniture. I'll switch back to this Snow White theme, and I'll change the story view from zoom in to classic. And so now you get a much more conventional view of the presentation. And you can see here, this is an example of Cecily being used within a tiddler. So in order to look at the sources, we're going to have to turn on toolbar buttons that'll let us do that. So ding, close, edit. And then, where is it? Here. So you can see that it's showing, this Cecily view is showing all the open tiddlers. And so that includes the control panel that I've just opened. If I close the control panel, you can see it also disappears from that listing. These guys are active, so I can switch him. Ooh, that was not a good example. I can click on links and navigate. I can use the tag menus, etc. So if we look at the source of that tiddler, it includes a scrollable, which is just a it's basically a fancy div that adds scroll bars if necessary. And we've got a list filter, which is referencing the current story list, taking off the tiddler that contains, taking off this tiddler so that we don't get recursion, showing them through the normal view template, but using the Cecily story view. We also pass some additional parameters to Cecily, the width of the of each tiddler, and the current map, which is stored in a tiddler called Cecily map. So if I go, oh, Cecily map isn't showing up there. So if we open Cecily map, you can see that it's a, oh, that wasn't very helpful. You can see that it's a JSON tiddler, and do that, it's a bit easier. It's got information about where new tiddlers should be placed on the map, and it's got positions for the tiddlers that it knows about, so to speak. It's not supported yet, but the way that the previous one works is that as soon as I move a tiddler around or resize it, the map is dynamically updated. Here we don't have it going that way round, but if I close some tiddlers so that we can see TiddlyWiki, you can see you see the one tiddlers there. You may not, oh no, let's use the one that's called images, which includes Motab and Jack. So if I edit this JSON, find the entry for images, it's got a rotation of -11. I'm going to change that to 41, 6. And then as I finish editing, oh, looks like I need to refresh that guy. There, you can see he's been rotated. It should obviously have automatically refreshed when I modified the map, but that's not implemented yet. So the thing I glossed over here is that this, by implementing Cecily as a story view, you can use it within tiddlers, or you can use it for the whole main story view. So now I've switched the main story view to Cecily mode. It's not much use because I can't drag the tiddlers around at the moment, but if the map specified the positions of these tiddlers, then they would be positioned as per the map. And for the moment, they're just positioned in a horizontal stack. So I think that's hopefully the answer that you were looking for, Nick, that the idea is to be able to have zoomable maps within individual tiddlers. You'd also be able to put a map in the sidebar. Sorry, something's going. Okay, Nick is trying to video call me. Nick, how you need to join the Hangout is go to the address, this URL. Oops, sorry, you can't see it, but I'm just pasting into the main Hangout window. Join the Hangout. So Nick, you need to go there, and then hopefully you will be able to join us. But I should also show you, while we're just waiting for Nicholas to hopefully get in, Felix's stuff. I think I'm linking to it in here. So Felix's task graph plugin, we've shown several times during Hangouts, is a very nice implementation or integration of a library called viz.js, which gives us these very nice connected graphs, and you can see there's physics. So when I move things around, you get that kind of wobble. Felix has done an awful lot of development to this over the last few weeks, I think. It's tapped a real chord. I think a lot of people have been very interested in it. Obviously here we've got it in a taskbar, but you can see here we can also use it within a tiddler. So these things, I personally find these kinds of graphs kind of interesting, but I've come to think that they're a bit of a mirage. So in my head, I often think of things in these terms, you know, boxes and lines joining them. But I find that in practice, once you get beyond a disappointingly small number of boxes, the links become very hard to read. There's a particular issue, is that the brain is very apt to see relationships that aren't there. The fact that these two things are next door to, I mean, they may be in place deliberate, but often with these kinds of graphs, they're automatically placed, and particularly if you're looking at a slice of the data that there isn't a manually curated map for, then there's no choice but for the system to somehow choose its own positions for these nodes. And I find that there is this human acuity for seeing these relationships due to spatial arrangement and so on. I'd rather use that to convey relationships, if you see what I mean. So Nick hasn't managed to join yet. Next question from Nick. Do you feel that TiddlyWiki would be difficult to turn into an email client, either live or by parsing the contents of a Unix-style mbox file or its equivalent in PC and Mac? I've already reduced a large series of emails to TiddlyWiki where they are far more useful. Interesting that you frame, sorry, let me stop screen sharing. Nick, it's interesting that you frame it as turning TiddlyWiki into an email client. I absolutely think that better integration with email would be incredibly useful. A scenario that I really like is for TiddlyWiki to provide an IMAP interface to the tiddlers within it. The IMAP is a horrible protocol, really horrible. And I should explain, IMAP is a 15, 20 years old, I think, but it's a reasonably standard, well, I shouldn't even say that because it's bedeviled with compatibility problems. It's an attempt to create a standardized API for the email model that Outlook made popular. So that's the idea of having a hierarchical list of folders which contain emails, and that one of those folders, your magic, your inbox, because new emails appear there. And IMAP lets you do things like search through different folders, move email messages from folder to folder. And Mario has just sent a link to email.js, which is a set of components that can be used to write email apps in pure JavaScript on the client in HTML5 or on the server in Node.js. So it's got an IMAP client. It doesn't have an IMAP server. That was rather what I feared. The reason, so let me come back to that. The reason why I'm interested in providing an IMAP server interface is because all smartphones have email clients built in, typically with pretty good IMAP support. So a very nice way to get a, say in a corporate environment, dare I say it, to get a user set up with TiddlyWiki would be to set it up as an IMAP, as what would look to them like an email account. And you could imagine that when you navigate to the inbox that you would get a view of Tiddlers in reverse chronological order. And you could imagine making it so that replying to a Tiddler did something sensible with the additional text that you've added. So it's about taking advantage of existing clients. For me, that idea of being an IMAP server. Being an IMAP client obviously opens up a slightly different set of possibilities. It would be possible to answer your emails within TiddlyWiki. It would be possible to file them as they come in, and so on. I mean, all very much, I think, as Nick is imagining. So I guess part of the answer to the question is how we would do it would depend entirely, I think, on taking advantage of the opportunities offered by off-the-shelf libraries. So I personally I've got no background with any of these protocols, and so writing either client or server software for IMAP or SMTP would just be, it probably feel a bit like time travel, actually, going back to the early 90s, because they're both quite ancient protocols. But as Mario has just shown, for lots of these scenarios, there are existing libraries that we may be able to take advantage of.
And also, I think there is a lot of software that can be used as an IMAP server. So it's not bound to TiddlyWiki, but it could be used as a Tiddler store.
Yes.
If you have a standard IMAP server, because they have a notion of folders and inbox, outbox, and all this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean the protocol is horrible. Is the only thing I can say. So I don't know whether the idea of storing Tiddlers on an IMAP server, I guess it could work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. Yeah,
but the big answer to Nick is I think we're all quite interested in email integration. Yet another reason is we're very keen to eat our own dog food for the discussion groups, which currently hold TiddlyWiki discussion groups, currently held on Google Groups, and we'd love those to be in TiddlyWiki. For me personally, I'm used to messages to the group popping up on my phone by virtue of them being emails and getting email notifications. And I'd really miss that if we went to some kind of web-only discussion forum based on TiddlyWiki. I don't know. I mean, there's other lateral things we can do. It might be that a useful thing to do is to integrate with IFTTT, I think, with a service called If This Then That, which is a very easy to use service for basically constructing workflows from web services. They include things like processing incoming emails, sending emails when things happen. And so in terms of opening up TiddlyWiki to the flexibility of being able to do things via email, doing it indirectly via IFTTT would, I think, buy us a lot of flexibility in one fell swoop. It offers integration with, I think, maybe 100 different services, many of which you could readily think of scenarios that integration with TiddlyWiki would be useful. So that's a resounding yes, I think. Um, right now, finally, we're at the question that I tried to answer at the beginning that turned out to be Nick's um, so far final question. Other desirable linkages with TiddlyWiki would be Wolfram Alpha, Frink for general purpose calculations, conversions, and maths. So let's have a look at both of those. So Wolfram Alpha I am familiar with. And part of the reason why I'm familiar with it is because Apple's Siri, its kind of voice activated thing, integrates with Wolfram Alpha. So if you ask certain types of questions like how wide is the moon, it is quite good at coming up with the answers. So it's telling us that the moon is 2,000 miles wide, which I always think is very surprising, that it's much smaller than we would expect. So the degree to which we can integrate with Wolfram Alpha, I think, is rather dependent on what kind of API they offer. It may be the kind of thing that, again, might usefully be done within Tiddly Desktop. So Tiddly Desktop would be able to do things like give you a toolbar button that takes the currently selected text, pops up Wolfram Alpha in a window, lets you select text within that window, and then when you click dismiss, copies the text into the current cursor position in the current tiddler, that kind of thing. And I guess, yeah, being able to, it says download page, let's see. So we can download the results as a single interactive or static document for offline use. Okay, so we don't get to do that unless we have a pro account, which is understandable. But for those with pro accounts, I imagine being able to embed those PDFs could be useful in some situations. The other thing that Nick mentioned was Frink by Alan Eliasson. So there's a web interface. Okay, so these sample calculations give us a flavor of what it's good for, that you can write English-style questions and get mathematical results. I don't know, I would have, it looks like there might be a bit of overlap, I think, with Wolfram Alpha. I mean, they go to a lot of trouble. They're quite good at things like, is Sapphire Loren older than Maggie Smith? Because they've got that, as I understand it, Wolfram's aim appears to be to build a database of all human knowledge in computable form. And okay, it impressively managed to access its celebrity database for Maggie Smith, but it doesn't look like it's been able to parse my question in exactly the way that I expected. Looks like Frink's focus is on natural language understanding, and I guess it must have, by the look of it, there must be a bunch of knowledge in there too, but it's not clear to me whether that knowledge is, conversion ratios between Celsius and Fahrenheit style stuff, or whether it's, again, how old Sapphire Loren is. Hard to tell. But yes, so the answer to both of those, Nick, is basically the same. To the extent that they offer an API, we should be able to take advantage of that API. Depending on how the API is implemented, we may be able to call it from the single file version of TiddlyWiki, but that these days is not a safe bet, because browsers aren't keen on letting file URI pages interoperate with web services these days. So it might be in both cases that the most useful integration would be either under Node.js, where Node.js presumably as a server would be able to access the APIs in the way that they were intended, or in Tiddly Desktop, where we've got this opportunity to kind of have a research sidebar, if I can put it that way, which would be, I think for both of these things, it would be a matter of you select some text in a tiddler, I guess in edit mode. You look at a drop down to choose between Frink and Wolfram Alpha. Then you click a go button, and it passes the selected text to that service, gives you the results, and as I said before, gives you a way to automatically copy selected text, I guess, and images from the answer. So very nice questions, Nick. What I'm going to try to do is just have a quick look in my email to see if I can find Nicholas's mock-up, which I think he posted to the group. Nick, I don't know if you're viewing the presentation and you're able to send me a link to your mock-up, that would be very helpful. So this is Nick did a mock-up of the idea I mentioned earlier, the layout, which replaces the sidebar with a horizontal toolbar at the bottom of the screen. In fact, if we
I think it was in the the GitHub issues, I think.
Ah, was it? Okay. Well, can I?
It's proposal, I think, a moment. No, it's a different one.
Okay, well, Nicholas, if you're watching and you can poke the URL through, that would be great. Oh, there was a. No, okay, and I was just going to. Oh, I'm so sorry. I've completely lost track during that. Looking at email is the problem, of course. But there was something else I was going to go to from. No. Okay. Sorry about that, Nick. I may remember in a minute. Okay. Is there anything from anybody else that they'd like to cover? Nathan, Mario, Jed?
No.
Okay. I remembered what it was now. Isn't that the way, of course, when one turns away? So let me just screen share again. So a fun thing that I did in the summer, and I don't think did I share it in a Hangout? I can't really remember. Probably did at the time that I did it. It's I'd been meaning to do this for ages. It's a time-lapse video of TiddlyWiki's development. So if I go to my channel, my video manager, it was. Right, got it. So what I did was went back over the GitHub repo and grabbed every committed version of TiddlyWiki and then saved an image of each one and then stitched them together into a movie. It was the sort of thing I thought it was going to be quite hard. I'd been thinking about it for a while, but actually getting it done, particularly when one's only doing one video, if you see what I mean, wasn't that hard. But what I was going to show you is that back here, the way this video is showing, we're not seeing the top and bottom of the screen actually, which is and weirdly, okay, so you can see it in the preview that there's a top bar that just isn't visible up there. How weird. Does that help? No. Okay, so originally TiddlyWiki, before it had a sidebar, had a position fixed toolbar, and the idea was that the lists would drop down. Oh, actually, maybe I've got a local copy of it. Bear with me. I'll just stop screen sharing while I try and find it. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I should have done this in the beginning. So here in QuickTime is the original video, and when its toolbar disappears, so you can see there's a view menu, and that was well, same as the view menu we've got at the moment, and a main menu, so to speak. And then
I don't think you're screen sharing.
Say again?
I don't think you're screen sharing.
Oh, of course I'm not screen sharing.
You are screen sharing. I saw.
Oh, I was. Oh, okay, good.
Jed, sometimes you have to select Jeremy, and if you have selected Jeremy, just unselect and select again. So then you can see the screen share.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So this version looks quite close. I think this was about just before I dropped it. So you can see now there's a sidebar. Every time I move the mouse, that thing comes back. But there's a sidebar, and we've got this top bar, and the top bar includes main menu, like links, the search box, in this case, full screen button, and an edit button. This is something that we've also, I think, has been discussed on GitHub recently, is the idea of having an explicit edit mode versus read-only mode. With features that would make it easier for people to be in edit mode themselves, and when they publish it, for people to see view mode. And obviously in view mode we hide the edit toolbar button and so on. But I dropped that in the interest of, it just felt at the time that I was doing this that it was building in some complexity a little bit too early, but it's always been an idea that I would like to return to. That was by way of a vote for the layout that Nick was asking for, of having a horizontal toolbar. As I say, the other thing I've been doing is more work on. Showed it last week, I think, and obviously with Christmas, not a whole heap has changed in the meantime. I think actually the only thing I've added now is when you reopen a window, it comes back in the correct position, in the same position that it was in when you closed it. The previous version did as well. So my plan is to add backups. That means a configuration user interface for telling Tiddly Desktop how to handle backups, and to copy the old version of a wiki before we overwrite it. So what I'm planning to do is to build something that Daniel Baird did as a plugin, I think called Less Backups, possibly Less Backup.
Less Backup plugin.
Idea of data backup Yeah, let's back up. You nominate a directory, you'd keep every backup for the last day, weeding the backups out so that you only keep one a week of old ones, that kind of thing. So to be useful, that's going to need a fair amount of configuration options, I think. But it's the idea is to give you the advantage of a pervasive backup strategy, which is basically taking a backup on every time you save a tiddler, without the attendant voracious consumption of disk space.
The Less Backup plugin had a possibility that you could say, okay, keep one backup for every day, as long as for 1 week, and then keep let's say a weekly backup, a monthly backup, and then for every year. So there was a maximum number of files that were stored, except for the years, because you always get one for the year. It was really hard to lose something. So this was it was a good system.
And I think from the discussions we've had about it, I think there'll be demand for a lot of configuration options to tweak those weeks and months and so on, time units. I'm also interested with backups in making them be incremental. So we could, well, one thing, obviously, we could reduce the backup size somewhat by topping and tailing the TiddlyWiki file, so we just keep the store area. But is it really worth it?
I think there is that. Then you have you introduce another problem, because if you delete let's say a master, then you only have the diffs, and then you have a problem too. But I think there are let's say most users are using Windows, and it's pretty easy to say right-click, convert this folder into a zip file, or compress this folder. And then it's transparent, compressed, and most algorithms can handle diffs very well. So I think it's done on the operating system level. With less
Well, I mean, one possibility would be to integrate JS zip, and to keep the backups in zip files, because that way we'd be able to we'd take advantage of the fact that TiddlyWiki files, a sequence of TiddlyWiki files in a zip file will compress outstandingly well, because it will recognize the common strings. Nick Spies, hello, welcome to the Hangout. Very glad that you were able to negotiate Google's tricky Hangout procedures.
Oh, it's amazing. Can you hear me?
We can, yes. That's great.
Oh,
great.
excellent.
Good to see you too. We're very, very pleased that you already introduced yourself, but would you like to now do so in person by telling us where you're from and telling us something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
My name is Spies, or Spies, if you prefer.
Apologies for mispronouncing your name.
But no problem. Primarily, I've done the email integration by hand to see how incredibly useful it is, and it would certainly be nice to have it automated, have it, whatever form of email file with all the headers and so forth and so on, to just parse it, and chop it up into tiddlies, and I suppose you'd have to do the linking yourself and annotations and whatnot. But
we can tag by the recipients, that kind of thing.
That could be done automatically. Certainly. But to I've had it. I just don't know enough about TiddlyWiki, in that I've only been working on it for several weeks. Even though I heard of it first about 2 years ago, in connection with potentially writing a book about Arthur Whitney's financial program called K+, which is a database which will handle apparently purportedly a million records across and a billion down for financial institutions, and in more or less real time, even though it's interpreted. It's based on EPL. So I thought their manual was written kind of in a funky manner and was proposing to write a book about it. But then I found that the program itself was so difficult to understand that I didn't pursue it. And I kind of dropped TiddlyWiki at the same time, ill-advisedly, because I'm finding it very, very useful now for all kinds of things. I mean, my mind is just like, reaching out for in many directions for.
What other tools have you used in the past to sort of fulfill the same needs?
Well, I've really written in linear editors. I have a preference for Emacs and that sort of thing. But then I'm actively trying to publish my paternal grandfather's memoirs, which are of great interest because my family had a financial empire in pre-World War I Russia. And so at any rate, I committed that to manually to LaTeX to make it kind of publishable. But it was more or less a straight translation with some, fiddling around with it in order to make it a little more readable. And but I'm a video editor, and I've done multimedia work as well. And my feeling is that this is sort of switching to a separate topic. That the documentation, video editing, just to clarify myself, is kind of a process of finding the optimal path through the available material. And
Very nice. Yes.
So, in a sense, when you're a student and you don't really know anything about, let's say, TiddlyWiki, it would be nice to have the optimal way of learning pointed out, even if it's within a branching medium.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding that to be a problem because I get off on a sidetrack and then suddenly I can't get back because we discussed, before having back and forward buttons, more or less like a browser, which might help that somewhat. But still, it would be nice to have a way of recording different people's ideas of what the optimal path for learning TiddlyWiki is, and then implementing that. It could be just through tags, and following the list of tags. So that was one remark that I made that I never got any feedback from. It was practically 3 weeks ago or so that I sent an email to, I don't know which of the groups. It's kind of confusing, actually. There's the Git business, and then there's TiddlyWiki,
Google groups, yeah,
TW5 and TWDev and whatever. And whether they all propagate to one another or not is an open question.
And they don't, actually. They're separate. For me, they come together in my email because I have both GitHub and the Google group set up to come into email. And I use Gmail, and Gmail's pretty good at sorting things. And actually, it puts the GitHub stuff and the Google group stuff in the same tab. And for me, I don't have anything else in the forums tab, so that actually works reasonably well. Yes, I mean it's a version of the fact that TiddlyWiki community is very disparate. Our resources are scattered,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
there's certainly an urge to
worldwide.
I have
fix that.
I have a question, Nick. Is it the TiddlyWiki at tiddlywiki.com, the contents tab? Is it not sufficient? So because there is the table of content where you have hello there, and there is kind of a structure. And if you start at the top, I think it's already, let's say, the basics, and then it's going to
Oh yeah,
the details.
I presume I don't recall looking at it recently, but within TiddlyWiki itself,
Hmm.
um, I mean, I suppose you can drag in, additions from other sources. There doesn't seem to be a mechanism to say, okay, I want to be in learn mode and and have a series, one or more paths
Hmm.
uh, that are have restricted links or have links that automatically, like subroutines, bounce back to the
Hmm.
main theme.
Hmm.
So I'm
Yeah,
so
and
unfamiliar with this that I don't really know how to answer your question.
well, one of the picking up one post that I showed earlier, the introduction edition, which
Oh yeah, I
does
saw that.
several
Yeah,
things. Yeah,
the Zoom.
strips the user interface down to make it simpler, and
Yeah,
provides a kind of singular path.
yeah, that's very
Intentionally, it
nice.
does it with links because then the idea is that kind of teaches people. So you could imagine it having at the bottom backwards and forwards buttons, and indeed it would be entirely possible to do that.
Hmm.
And in some situations, that would be the best thing to do. But here, part of the purpose was to try and get people to learn TiddlyWiki by experiencing it and trying to stop
Yeah.
that being overwhelming
Well,
by progressively disclosing it. But I think so having done that, one of the things that we thought might be interesting was to take it further as a kind of guided tour where it would actually introduce features, wait until you've clicked on the right thing before it moves to the next step, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And yeah, I think that's it's quite labor intensive because it's like writing documentation, but it's interactive
exactly.
and it needs to be
Or
tested and
editing the
stuff.
film.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to say was the idea of a kind of preset path. The other manifestation of that idea I'm very interested in is being able to imagine a TiddlyWiki that had tabs at the top of the screen. When I select one of those tabs, it basically jumps to a preset story. So I might have therefore tabs for introduction, which would be the kind of step-by-step tabs for latest, and that would be just a sequence of the most recent things. So it would feel hopefully a bit like being on a normal website, and it would allow us to prepare. So I think a lot of the usages of TiddlyWiki are for exactly as well. Now you suggested these words that are quite attractive about finding the optimum path, but that one is using a non-linear tool to produce an output that is essentially linear, and I think that's it's very powerful. That us as the authors, that this non-linear perspective gives us a sort of God's bird's eye view of the situation, and the people who are experiencing it, who are taking the linear path, they simply don't need to be aware of that. But the little fuzzy bit with TiddlyWiki is the idea of of anyone presenting, essentially a document, so a sequence of tiddlers that's been predetermined. That's part of what you're publishing is the ordering of those tiddlers. But making it so that if you click on a link to a chunk that isn't open, that it's, for instance, it might appear as an annotation in a floating yellow box, and those floating yellow boxes might stack up. And if I click outside them, then they'd all disappear, and I'd be back to the main text.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, actually.
Yeah, and it's actually where you've joined the TiddlyWiki community, I think, probably at about the time of the moratorium. So we an
Yes, I did.
endless debate for us is that those of us who kind of get TiddlyWiki and are excited about it, we keep having these amazing ideas how it could be even better, and often realizing those ideas can be quite attractively cheap, because the best things are things where we make a few small tweaks to the core, and then layer some macros and stuff on top and have some completely new end user feature. But our challenge, we think at the moment, is that for people who are outside TiddlyWiki, it's still too hard to understand what it's for, what its benefits are, and that crucial first learning journey that we've just been talking about is too hard.
I find myself saying, "Come, look at this. You've never seen anything like this before." And I mean, I think that your demo with the zooming to this and an explanation, zooming to that, and so forth and so on, is excellent in that regard, because it does show some of the unique qualities of it and so forth. But in use, I feel, I mean, going back to the back and forward buttons, the history, you said it should only be used in a single window mode or whatever, single tiddler mode.
Oh no, you can use it in the backwards and forward stuff works in classic view as well when you've got multiple tiddlers displayed.
Okay, so the history is in the TiddlyWiki file itself.
So there's a magic tiddler, and what I would normally do on explaining stuff like this is to show it, just to be clear. That was your IMDb page, by the way, Nick. And if I navigate through a few tiddlers, TiddlyWiki, tags, creating and editing tiddlers, and now in the System tab, there's a tiddler called $history list, and you can see each of the tiddlers that I clicked on is recorded in an array, along with the position. In fact, that's the position of the link that I clicked on to get there, and we need to keep track of that in order for the animations to work. Now that if you select those settings that we touched on before you arrived, so that's change the address bar to reflect the current tiddler and update browser history, and now we have, I'll navigate to a couple of things. Now we get our back behavior. Well, I must say, I think there might be a minor problem with it, but I don't want to get too distracted by that at the moment. But it's intended to work in the way that I think you're expecting. But was I right in saying that the reason why you wanted the buttons added to the TiddlyWiki was because you were using Tiddly Desktop?
Yeah, I'm using one of two things that have the cat logo. One says desktop, and the other says TiddlyWiki.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, it is confusing. When I created the app, it needed to be called Tiddly Desktop to distinguish it from TiddlyWiki. But kind of when you're seeing it in like an app store, I think it should say TiddlyWiki, because if one's on iOS or something, or on a Mac, and obviously this isn't in the Mac App Store, but TiddlyWiki would, we assume, be the thing that people would be searching for. But yes, undoubtedly confusing. Oh well, good. I'm glad you're a Tiddly Desktop user. What operating system are you on, Nick, as well?
The very latest Mac, 10.1.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, in that case. And what's your browser of choice when you're not using Tiddly Desktop?
Well, it's still Firefox.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize, that I had to use Chrome in order to actually do this.
some things, it depends what, I mean, Firefox is still generally the best browser for use with TiddlyWiki. The one thing that Firefox
No,
can't do
no,
is
I mean
the uploading to TiddlySpot.
this conversation. I mean,
Sorry, say again?
the conversation that we're in, the Google application that whatever it's
Yes.
called.
Oh, Google Hangouts.
Yeah. I didn't realize for a good while because it said, conversation will start soon, and then the time ran way past 11, which is my time here.
Yeah.
11:40 now. But speaking of the technicalities of this, I could show you the PNG picture of the screen proposal.
Oh, yes. Would you mind doing that? That would be very useful.
How do I do that? Just drag it on?
No, on the left-hand side of your browser window, of the Hangouts window, when you move the mouse to it, you should see a vertical toolbar, and the second from the top, normally, a green rectangle with an arrow. Yeah, so if you click that, and then what we all find is that although it offers you the possibility of sharing a particular window, it's generally better to share your entire desktop, because sometimes things like alert boxes and so on don't get shared otherwise.
Well, I have two screens, and
even more exciting to see what it does. I've no idea what it'll do, and that's it. Oh no, I think it lets you choose which of the screens you want to share.
Yeah. Okay. It does show. Yeah, there it is. So if I show, click on this, that's the picture.
Okay, so now you are screen sharing. Yeah, it's just come through. Excellent.
Okay.
So talk us through then everything that we can see here.
So, I don't know whether my cursor shows up. I guess not.
It does, yes. So we can see your cursor. Is that, do you have that crosshair on by default?
Yeah.
I didn't even know the Mac could do that. Is that a third-party tool?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It helps me find the cursor. I have a 27-inch screen and then a second monitor.
Yeah, I've certainly found that with two monitors, finding a 3mm mouse cursor is a bit of a joke.
So you see there's a hairline surrounding the viewport of what scrolls, and same on the other side, so you know what's going on here. Tools at the bottom, so they're always available, so you can add a tiddler anytime you want, the plus button down the bottom. Not scrolling, of course. This really could be shoved up to the top, so you could make this list as long as you wanted. The subtitle could be jammed in here with the title somehow, but or just popped up as a tooltip. And
I guess in the sidebar, you've taken care that the scrollable region is the body of the tab and does not include the tabs themselves.
That's you mean?
So if the open recent tools more tabs would be.
Oh yeah, all this.
If
I click the recent, it would do whatever it does now. I'm not sure. Nothing traverses the center line of the screen. Let's say if you divided them equally. So there's no harm in having a scroll bar in the middle, in my opinion, and it acts as a visual demarcation.
Yeah, no, it's much. I mean, it's. I think it's kind of a bug the way the scroll bars have ended up, but it's a consequence of the way that I implemented the sidebar, which, as I say, is a bit inflexible at the moment anyway, because it doesn't let us have multiple sidebars in a useful way. But that was another thing I was going to say about the path stuff you're talking about, being how one wanders off the path and how hard it can be to get back. I'm very interested in having this multiple column display so that I can have a sequence of tiddlers in a story and then make it so when I click on a link, it opens in a new column, and then I can navigate within that column and then go back to, so like a stack of columns.
Are you familiar with the game Go?
Yes, but I haven't played it for a long time.
Okay, there are players for games that show alternative paths. Exactly the way you're describing it. In a sense, you're able to jump from one outcome of a certain line of play, sort of like, if you, in a book, it's very difficult to visualize that. And in fact, in any medium, except by this sort of graphical method of showing the alternative consequences of a certain play, where each, Fuseki and Goseki are the optimal plays on each side to win a corner, let's say. And so the books, I have an example of a Go book right here.
Oh, you want to unscreen share?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I have to go back to the left and select something else.
There should be a thing saying
stop. Okay, yes. Okay, it's just a book, and then they have different diagrams indicating different positions and so forth, and then it's hard to see, but they often do it with numbers, and it's very hard to follow, unless you enter it. Now, some editors for Go allow you to enter alternative branches, so you can actually follow the logic of this much more easily. And it's exactly what you're proposing. And,
how fascinating. So I'm just doing some Googling to see if I can find one of these editors. Okay, so there's SGF is the
file
format.
Yeah, and I think that incorporates that capability, if I'm not mistaken, such that players that are enabled to handle that branching business can actually visualize it. So
how interesting. Interesting. So that also touches something I frequently talk about, which is how I would like TiddlyWiki to be good at supporting domain-specific notations. So I've been delighted to discover that like choreographers have a notation for writing down dances. Staggering, absolutely staggering. Who would have thought it? I've no idea, in fact, in that particular example, if there even exists a way to type those things. Or another example would be chord diagrams. I play the guitar badly, and so rather than using real music, I use those, songs with chord diagrams over the top. Yep, tab. And one again could, and there are examples out there of programs that can convert a kind of textual representation to a reasonably nice looking, and in fact real musical notation too. But I think for me it's not that any individual notation is of a special interest. It's that I like the idea of being an environment in which it's easy to bring in other notations, and I guess to mix them and so on. I think were you one of the people that recently I've seen more people who install KTeX, the KTeX plugin.
Well, I mentioned what I meant, however, was not. That's kind of mathematical setting is, available in word processors and whatever. Or as a standalone thing, which you paste into a word processor. What I meant actually was to
doing the calculations.
No, to actually write a novel, let's say, and then dump it into whatever format and have it end up as LaTeX, and and then send it off to the typesetter, or make a PDF file to send your publisher instead of a TypeScript. Now, they might prefer TypeScript because they may not like your typesetting, but but then again, it's kind of hard to second guess Donald Knuth and Zap and the people that he worked with in designing tech to begin with. But the other thing I wanted to mention was your zooming interface thing was very impressive, but that isn't what I meant. Maybe you covered that already earlier. I can look on the...
oh yes, this is about being able to apply the zoomable view within a tiddler.
Yes, and as a way of visualizing the Tiddly, the wiki that within which you are, working.
And I'll just very quickly show you there were two things. Go on. So sorry.
Yeah, I came online as you were showing moving around some. Yeah, I wasn't here, but a little later, I guess.
So it's this. It's within the introduction thing that we've got a demo of a Cecily view that's within a tiddler. So these guys, there's a map that's basically just laying these things out horizontally with a little wiggle on them to make them look good, and they're fully active.
That's cool. Yeah.
The other thing to show you, which seems to, did I not open it, or where's it gone? Was the, here it is, Felix Cooper's task graph plugin, which I think is...
This is where I came in.
Yeah, so this is a thing I think that
but
lots of people are interested in.
Yeah, if you put this in a zoomable thing, then a tiddler with 1,000 pages conceivably could be, given the caveats associated with zoomable UIs, it would enable you to see how things are linked and perhaps derive some information. Actually, Mathematica has that sort of thing, so you can take your... social networks can be mapped in Mathematica, and end up with a huge hash of lines, creating a multiply connected graph.
How come, is there a query that would let us see an example?
Say it again.
Is there a query that would let us see an example?
I couldn't produce it right off the bat. I mean, you can look on their site, not Wolfram, but not Alpha, but Wolfram Research. Wolfram. Yeah, maybe that'll do it.
That's the other kind of graphs he means, I think, actually. Okay, well, I mean, any of those references are gratefully received. So, I mean, you can...
What the API is for Mathematica is another thing, and I don't know what their licensing arrangements are.
Well, Nathan piped in the sidebar that Wolfram Pro is cheap and totally worth it. So that's a strong recommendation.
Here. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Nick, what's your programming background? Have you?
I wrote a book on Forth, which was published by Prentice Hall in '86, and it happened to have a routine that I called line life, after John Horton Conway's life. Yes. Except it was linear, and it was implemented in like 3 lines of Forth code. It was just a eye candy, Well, that formed the premise of Wolfram's 2002 book, a new
A new
kind of
kind of
science
sound. Yeah.
because it produced exactly the same kind of patterns.
Yeah.
So I brought this to his attention, and he gave me a full commercial Mathematica in trade for my book signed.
That's very cool.
Kind of nice, yeah.
Yeah, no, very nice. I don't know if I
I,
sent an email, but fourth is a long interest of mine. And back in the 80s, I was writing fourth interpreters, fascinated by the idea of a language that you could bootstrap with so little code.
yeah, and it was ported to practically everything because all you had to port was essentially a similar to, I mean, it was ported to the Cray on the one hand, all the way down to the smallest embedded stuff. And it's been used on, I don't know, 70 or 80 shuttle missions and so forth. But
an influential for me thing was that there was a music synthesizer. So the popular home computer in the 80s here was the BBC Micro, and they launched a synthesizer as a peripheral. And this synthesizer didn't have a keyboard, and you programmed it in Forth. And so it's, again, it touches several things we were talking about here. Non-linear. It gave you this glorious non-linear view of music that encouraged you to see the repetitions and the variations and so on, and to codify them. And I loved the way that a well-written piece of music for that platform read so much better, in fact, than conventional sheet music, because you saw the structure. I mean, admittedly, you had to run the Forth program in your head in order to in order to properly understand it. But still, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. But you'll notice that TiddlyWiki is not based on Forth, despite all of that, because it remains something that seems, you could phrase it as, isn't it surprising how many people learned to write Excel macros in the 90s? That those normal procedural languages do seem to tap into some elemental, something that's quite easy to understand for users.
Yeah, one additional thing about the book, it sold out a printing of 100,000 in the USSR because they were using 386s when we were using Penninghams.
Of course, yes.
So it was very popular there. I only have a copy that I've downloaded from the web. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy of the Russian version of my book. I co-authored it with Malin Kelly, the late Malin Kelly who taught at the University of Virginia. But
I'm looking at the Amazon entry for the book. Because of that helpful way that Amazon lists books that you can't buy.
I can send you a copy of it if you like. I mean, I got some remainder ones for very cheap. So.
Well, that's very thoughtful, and it would join a very small Forth library of Forth books.
Well, Brody, right. There was a guy at University of Kent, I think it was, who wrote a very, very nice book on Forth.
While we're on Forth, did you see this? That I imagine you'll have come across this, but a very interesting example of the use of TiddlyWiki by Charlie Hitzelberger, who used to document his port of Forth for the Commodore PET. The thing that we all really liked about it is that this is auto-generated, and that's quite an interesting, useful scenario.
That company was located only miles from here. The Commodore.
Oh, right.
It was in Norristown and then in Westchester, which is very close to where I live.
I was I couldn't afford a Commodore PET, but it was the computer that I remember. I'm not sure what the word desiring very much. And then I ended up with kits. Made MK14 and
Mhm.
ZX80 and all those.
Yeah, well, it would have been a MITS or an Altair in this country.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But the
but
65, little did I know, the 6502 processor is one of the loves of my life, and hugely influential. I think I mean, well, we've got to be careful about how many rabbit holes we go down, but I
yeah,
can see a line of influence from my experience of 6502 and Z80 back in 1980, that still influences the way I think about software
yeah.
today.
The other thing that I did in programming was HyperCard.
Ah, did you really? Great,
Yes,
yes.
I received a disk that was a copy of a disk that was handed out from Mac World when it was
Yeah,
still held in Boston
yeah.
by Bill Atkinson himself. So I'm like, you know, 2 degrees removed from Bill Atkinson, and all the programs that I wrote were too, and I was kind of considered the guru, and I taught a course at Carnegie Mellon University for non-computer science majors in HyperCard. I thought that was one of the biggest mistakes that Apple made to yank that, because I had a daughter who, when she was 5, learned how to program in HyperCard. I mean, she's very, very bright, but um, um, now they don't have, it's not computing for the people, anymore, so much.
No,
Um,
I love it. I mean, I was actually just switching away from the Mac at the time that HyperCard came out. But I was again heavily influenced by it. A gig that a sort of freelance gig that I did,
yeah,
was for an English firm that made video capture cards, and they wanted, one of the side effects of the video capture was that they had a really nice, at the time, unusual broadcast quality 24-bit video card, and
hmm
I built as much of a HyperCard clone as you can build in about 8 weeks. So it was
yeah,
more. It was the hypertext part. You could drag rectangles around. Those rectangles were pretty much tiddlers in today's language that could be different types, including
yeah,
text and buttons and links and so on. But there was no scripting.
yeah.
So the sidebar, by the way, Nathan and Mario both using emoticons to express their emotional attachment to HyperCard.
I think I don't know. So because Nick says that yeah, youngsters are not able to program anymore, I think that there is the Raspberry Pi project, which is really
Oh,
great,
yeah.
and they are using Sketch, which is
Ah,
which is a little bit different, but it's like, yeah. So you can see that the structure of a program in yeah, the rectangles and loops and ifs and all this stuff, and I think it's quite interesting. So yeah,
yeah,
and also easier for non-programmers or for starters, because you have a visual indication about the program.
right. It takes you back to the Fairchild and the very early
Yeah.
processors. That it's a wonderful development. The Raspberry Pi
Mhm.
business.
Mhm.
So
Very heartening, I quite agree. Because having grown up myself learning machine code and all this hardcore stuff,
yeah,
and then seeing people enter, people in my teams who just don't never had that sort of background, and
uh
so they don't really, unless you've written a multitasking kernel, you don't really understand what multitasking kernels
I'm
need to do.
sure. Yeah,
And of course, that's why they make people in computer science courses, I'm sure, even today, write things like that. But it's really fun, and to me, fun and instructive.
yeah,
Nathan's saying HyperCard was the second language I learned after Apple Basic. How cool, how cool. Although the language, the HyperCard language, wasn't it a bit like Apple Talk in that it was making an attempt to read as ordinary English.
Yes, I mean it's vice versa. I mean Apple Talk is newer,
Yes.
and then Lingo, which is the language of director,
Yes.
you know, is very HyperCard-like. There's still SuperCard, and there was a company based in England, I think, called Revolution, that had a superset of HyperCard. I don't know whether they're still operational or not, but it was a very good effort. Revolution, it's called.
I'm just trying to.
But I also have done Python, and I wrote a disassembler in Forth. So I disassembled the commercial Forth system, and I presented it to the owner of the system, and I said, "Look what I've done." So he immediately put me together with this limnologist at the University of Virginia, Malin Kelly, and had us started writing a book rather than, you know, publishing his system.
I also did some extensive disassembly. It's a very useful learning tool, I think.
Yeah, but the stuff that Chuck Moore is doing is like even far more radical, you know, where color Forth. I don't know if you have looked him up on the web, but he, you know, he's getting to be rather old now. I think he lives in Mountain View, California.
No, I haven't seen any of his recent work, but I'm now just loading up tabs with it. Oh, how interesting. I had no idea.
Elizabeth Rather, who really wrote Forth with him, is still active as the CEO of Forth Incorporated. And I've met both of them really at Rochester Forth Conference that used to be held every year. Around the time our book was published, quite a while ago now. But then with Forth, it's an incredible thing in that you're able to write from the bottom up and the top down simultaneously.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so I think there's a sense of transclusion in Forth, or rephrase that. There's something about using transclusion that can echo Forth, the way that you transclude a missing tiddler and then come back to fill it in later, that kind of thing.
Define that term to me. I don't
I don't know why people. So it's a standard term in wikis, and well, no, in hypertext, I think, for making a reference to content elsewhere, such that that content appears in line in the reference.
Yeah, I did actually. Okay, it's just
it's what a C programmer would call include, and I don't know that. To me, well, it's turned out to be very useful that there is a unique word for it, because that, you know, gives you things to call widgets and stuff. But I think include would have done perfectly well as the word, actually. But you know, who am I to throw stones at people neologizing, given that I've neologized furiously around TiddlyWiki. But look, guys, I'm really sorry, but I need to draw today's session to a close. The way that this happens is that we'll stop the broadcast in a couple of minutes, and then, in fact, the Hangout continues. So, I mean, I'll log off, but you guys will still be there, and sometimes, you know, the discussion continues afterwards. But before we close, is there any comments or thoughts from anybody that they're anxious to share?
What would you say are the critical skills to have in order to be to contribute to the development effort of TiddlyWiki?
Really annoyingly, as things stand at the moment, being able to use GitHub is a great help, because GitHub is the way that you can make a contribution that I can accept with a single click.
But you have to know JavaScript. I mean,
well, no, our content is in GitHub as well. So I mean, if you were wanting to make contributions in the area of, you know, content in the sense of writing, or content in the section of better indexing, tagging, and arranging the content we've got. Now, in fact, we can accept contributions. You know, people can and have sent me standalone index.htmls, and then I can process that into changes. But in terms of your question of what's the most useful skill, getting to the point where you can do a GitHub pull request is awesome, because once you've lowered the cost of that, then you're at the point where you see some wrinkle that's not right when you're using TiddlyWiki.com as a reference.
You supply a diff file to
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's all, and GitHub, I mean, once you've learned the essentials, is great at things like you can hold discussions around these things, and very often the contribution process it starts with quite a tentative, what do you think of this, and then we can discuss it and shape things. But as I said, recognize that it's a frustrating burden. But I also think, given the things we've talked about, I'm sure you wouldn't find it that difficult. It'll just be the rings of the syntax. But it's also
actually a lot of fun.
It's another interesting. Yeah, it's another very. And if you're amenable, there's a sort of basic explanation of Git, and you'll see, I'm sure, lots of this material on the web, where you can it basically only does one thing, which is the way that the commit history is modeled, and so you can learn it in this, as most people do, by sort of randomly learning certain commands. And obviously, I mean, I still Google for those commands all the time, but you can also come at it from this more what's the word? Building it up from these basic principles, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So, guys, it's for me to say thank you very much to everybody for joining me today. I said at the beginning of the Hangout, nobody joined for 10 minutes, so I thought I was going to be on my own, so it's really great that everybody was here. Nick, it's also great to welcome you to the Hangouts for the first time. I hope you'll be able to join us for subsequent Hangouts. Going forwards, there will be one more Hangout, and then there's going to be a couple of weeks without Hangouts, and then we'll resume at the end of January. But I'll send out invitations in the normal places explaining all of that. So I say thank you very much. For me, it was a very useful and interesting session. Really appreciate your time, and thank you very much. So we'll do our traditional waving goodbye.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.